gaining perspective. That's paradigm B. So, why did I start this? Why did paradigm B come through me? It's because I found that there's a distinction between these worlds that we can live in, and I've lived in, and one is almost mutual, or it could be mutually exclusive. Maybe not. Maybe it's more inclusive than the other. And paradigm B is basically the ability to gain perspective. And so doing the contrast of what is paradigm A is, and the way that I say this is that paradigm B and paradigm A, it's not a competition. The only thing, the difference is right now is I would say that paradigm A is the one that people live in that's most popular. So there's this other way that we can see and experience this world, paradigm B, and it's just not the most popular, even though it's becoming more popular, just because we can see the ridiculousness of how things work out when we stay embroiled in paradigm A. And I think there's always a movement towards true love, like what is the true love, instead of creating stories about what love is. But even like the religions and everything point to a lack of fear. And paradigm B is putting our courage. The way that I see it is that we all came here to be courageous, but all paradigm A is versus paradigm B is where we put our attention, where we choose to act out in the courage to overcome fear. Do we do it to keep a story alive, or do we do it to experience this world and figure out who we are as individuals without the world defining us? And so paradigm B is about, like, the major theme is perspective, in that it's an ever-expanding idea that we just continue to find deeper understandings and perspective that we can't find in paradigm A. And the reason you can't do it is because in paradigm A we live inside of stories, and we create these mental constructs. We've done it collectively. We determine what we think a man should be, what a woman should be, how this person should act, how that person should act, and it is all based upon right and wrong, and saying, well, we need to cheer this group on because they're the rightest, and so everybody just follows along and says, okay, we will consider them the heroes. And we create all these mental constructs within these stories, and this is where all the dysfunctional psychology lives. In paradigm B, these psychological ideas, cognitive dissonance, basically not being able to take in new information when it comes to us. It's a block in our mental capacity. And narcissism, codependency, these things are all just aspects of paradigm A. It is because what it is related to is this idea of figuring out which identities are the best identities, and then everybody screams saying, "I'm the best identity. We need to make my group the hero because we're doing this in our story and doing that in that story." And in paradigm B, it has nothing to do with the control over what the story is. It has to do with being in cahoots with what is. Like figuring out like how this reality works, how to be more loving, figure out who we are, why we're here. And instead of trying to put a story together, a mind story of who I thought I was, and an identity. So it's about gaining perspective. So the journey that I'm taking people on, and if they want to follow along and be a part of, is simply finding these tools that help us break free of the judgment that's in paradigm A, because basically that's how, very simply, that's how paradigm A works, is it needs a villain and a hero. And we mentally construct what we think is a hero, and then we sit and we create our meaning behind these identities because we picked the right groups or whatever else. And basically, paradigm A is about trying to be a good person by determining, like, who is the hero at this time, who's the villain at this time. It's always looking for that. That's a perfect example of that is in our popular psychology, we're now villainizing the narcissist. So we've got all these people that are like, you can get away from the narcissist. And then I'm pointing at people and they're saying they're a narcissist and that's a narcissist. Not realizing that narcissism only works if there's codependency. But we don't hear about the villain of the codependent, which is part of the control mechanism. It's ridiculous, and the dualistic idea of who the villain is and who the hero is never has like all the archetypes have endings and it just goes on. And it can go that way. And absolutely, that is one version of reality. But for people that are looking for a bigger understanding of how the world works, to actually experience love, to experience who you are, rather than trying to put together some mentally constructed idea of what life is about and what it's supposed to be. And, we're seeing it in our culture in paradigm A with the discombobulation that's happening with, let's say, the popular mindset, which would be the people who follow along with the news, and they believe that the negative idea of the world, basically the ego, figuring out how the egos during the day is the way you put together, you construct reality, is figuring out if you're the good guy or the bad guy. And when you look at it, it's just ridiculous. And it just never. And so the only reason that I would say, hey, take interest in this paradigm B thing is if you're like, I really want to be different. I really want the love thing to happen in the world. I really want to change the world. And the weird thing about changing the world isn't about finding the answer within the dualistic framework, figuring out who the villain is, and then you get to be the hero. That's kind of how that plays out, and it will always play out that way. Paradigm B, we are creating who we are, what we bring to those around us, and who we have. And it's coming without prejudice. It's coming without entitlement. All of these terms kind of coincide with one another. So paradigm B is just about building perspective and opening up the framework of how we operate as humans. and how we create meaning. And the idea is, in paradigm B, we find our foundation, and then from that foundation we can start letting go of things that don't serve this insatiable quest that's in paradigm A to be the hero of the ego story. That's really a good way to look at it. And you finally realize that can't happen anyway. That the hero is actually when we become just fine with whatever it is that we are, instead of trying to mold ourselves into some identity that fits the current egoic narrative. And that's all that everybody is getting crazy about. So yeah, so it's kind of another way to look at the old paradigm B kind of thing, and I hope this is helpful.